So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alan Shear, and I'm the School of Architecture's Associate Dean for Research and Technology here at the University of Texas at Austin. I have the distinct privilege of being the first, but not the only one, to welcome you here to this event. This afternoon's symposium, we need to talk about planning and designing for climate change, is organized by our Center for American Architecture and Design. The center serves to advance scholarship and critical practice across the professions that help shape the built environment. And it provides ways for the school to take a leading role in sharing new ideas in a public forum. The We Need to Talk About series has the special intention of fostering agency to address issues of equity and justice. Today's topic is one that demands attention from all of our professions. While the underlying processes of climate change can be understood as global in scope, the effects of climate change are highly localized and disproportionately felt. The new Biden administration has made environmental justice a centerpiece for its addressing of climate change. And in this context, the conversations that will take place today are not only urgently needed, they come in a moment when there's an openness to think differently, and we should seize this opportunity. Now, before I turn things over to Laura Vysotsky, the Center's Managing Director, and to Assistant Professor Miriam Solis, who is one of the faculty board members for the Center, I'd like to introduce Juan Tine Chirish, who will make our land acknowledgement. Thank you.
Okay. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. I'm Juan, one of the co-chairs of the Native American and Indigenous Association here at UT. And I would like to start with the land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on indigenous land. Moreover, we would like to acknowledge that and pay our respect to the Carrizo, Comecrudo, Coahuiltecan, Caddo, Tonkawan, Comanche, Lipan Apache, Alabama, Cushata, Kickapoo, Tiwa Pueblo, and all the American Indians and indigenous people and community who have been and have become part of these lands and territories in Texas, here in Turtle Island. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Juan. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my privilege to welcome you today to the second dialogue in our We Need to Talk About series, Planning and Designing for Climate Justice. I'm Leora Vysotsky. I'm the Managing Director of the Center for American Architecture and Design. Housekeeping items, just really quickly first, we'll have time for questions at the end of the program, so please enter questions into the Q&A, and you can use the chat box to discuss any topics at hand during the program. A few words of thanks to, first, thanks to Dean Michelle Addington and Associate Dean Alan Shearer for supporting and helping shape this series. Thank you to Communications Coordinator Kelsey Stein for getting the word out to our community and media outlets. And thank you to students Haley Algo and Heather Corcoran, who provided invaluable feedback and assistance in planning this. Our hope and our charge with this series is to discuss things that are difficult and uncomfortable, but that are critical to address in our industries and our academies. We want to challenge everyone to look at how, as designers, we can more positively shape our communities and in turn the profession, and to have a dialogue today that will matter to current students right now, and for which discussion topics and tools will be immediately applicable to your own lives. We want students to be able to take from these talks a sense of the agency that you have now and that you can have in the future to affect your disciplines, and to provide a platform for you to find and shape your voices around the issues that matter to you in design. To that end, the discussion today will include 4 students. Our student participants today are Sari Albornoz. Sari is a Latina Austinite pursuing her master's degree in community and regional planning. Her academic interests include urban ecology, community-driven agriculture, and the potential for public urban spaces to serve as sites for advancing racial equity and fostering community climate resilience. Joseph Chandler is a student from Houston, Texas, pursuing a bachelor's degree in architecture and a minor in Mandarin Chinese. He is interested in housing, urban design, the long-term climate resilience strategies of urban centers, and sustainable design in developing countries. Juan Tine Chirish is a non-binary Tzutujil Cachiquel Mayan student from Guatemala. He has a master's in community and regional planning and is pursuing a PhD in Latin American studies. His work centers on recognizing the knowledge of women of color, especially Indigenous and Black women, in micro projects of permaculture and cartography. As a non-binary Indigenous researcher, Juan pays close attention to methodologies and positionality in collecting data in academia. Taylor Davis is a master's candidate in landscape architecture. She previously worked as a public school garden teacher, where she was inspired to pursue a career in outdoor design and planning. She earned undergraduate degrees from UC Santa Cruz in feminist and environmental studies. As society today is controlled by hegemonic oppressive systems that exist by design, as a designer, it is important to Davis to dismantle those systems to create equitable, inclusive spaces. And last but not least, our moderator today is Dr. Miriam Solis. Solis is an assistant professor of community and regional planning at the University of Texas at Austin. Her research focuses on infrastructure planning and design. Examining how infrastructure can reinforce racialized inequality, she highlights organizational, procedural, and policy strategies that advance social justice. Dr. Solis's ongoing research projects involve partnerships with nonprofit organizations and local government, including EcoRise, an Austin-based environmental education organization, and the Austin Department of Public Works. She is a 2020-2022 UT Austin Humanities Institute Fellow for her work on youth perspectives on racial justice and decarbonization. Please welcome Dr. Solis.
Thank you everyone for joining us here today. Thank you Juan for leading us in a land acknowledgement and Alan for the warm introduction. Leora provided important context for the event. I also want to thank Leora for making this event happen. She originally conceptualized the event and worked with all 8 of us participants to bring us all here together today. So thank you very much, Leora. Today, we're going to be talking about how we in our role as urban planners, designers, and architects can prioritize climate change as a fundamental consideration in our work. We anticipate that this will be a forward-thinking and hopeful discussion. Today's event is also timely and urgent. Climate change is an existential crisis. The World Health Organization reports that the effects of climate change are already killing more than 150,000 people per year, and these figures are getting worse. In this moment, the pandemic is compounding the consequences of climate change. And COVID-19 illustrates why we must be so deliberate about not just responding to climate change, but that we must also advance climate justice. Like climate change, COVID-19 is a crisis about the air we breathe. It is leading to the premature death of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, especially our elders. These losses are devastating communities, particularly younger generations who rely on elders' wisdom and leadership. But we know that people of color's ability to breathe had been compromised long before the pandemic. We know this because in the United States, the siting of polluting industrial facilities in communities of color has poisoned countless people. And we know this because "I can't breathe" were among Eric Garner's last words. These forms of violence are extensions of histories of colonialism, dispossession, and enslavement. They represent the intertwined relationship between the exploitation of the planet and its people. Yet time and time again, Indigenous, Black, and Brown communities have worked to protect their relationship to the land, despite the extractive pressures working against them. Through these struggles, frontline communities remind us that hopelessness and complacency are a privilege. This is why the anticipation that we hope to contribute to and cultivate today is informed by past and current struggles. This is also why our emphasis on justice is so deliberate. At the UT School of Architecture and elsewhere, the planning and design fields are increasingly reckoning with our discipline's role in reinforcing inequality. Our students have and will continue to go on to shape the built environment in very important ways. They will plan infrastructure, they will develop housing, and they will design bicycle trails and regional parks. And we increasingly hear from students themselves that our fields ought to do things differently if we want to redress injustices. So today we will be responding to some of these students' most salient priorities and concerns. The questions that will be presented to the panel were developed, workshopped, and synthesized by students over several meetings. We've convened a remarkable panel of climate justice movement and thought leaders to respond to these questions, to enhance our understanding of how climate justice intersects with our discipline's work. We will also learn about new ideas and strategies we can employ to advance climate justice. So like everyone here today, I'm very grateful to share this space with our guests. Dr. Robert Bullard is often described as the father of environmental justice. He is former dean of the Barbara Jordan McKinney Leland School of Public Affairs at Texas Southern University. Professor Bullard is currently Distinguished Professor of Urban Planning and Environmental Policy. Prior to TSU, he was founding director of the Environmental Justice Resource Center at Clark Atlanta University. He is an award-winning author of 18 books that address many environmental topics, including sustainable development, racism, and urban land use. Dr. Bullard is co-founder of the HBCU Climate Change Consortium and a proud U.S. Marine Corps veteran. In 2020, WebMD gave him its Health Heroes Trailblazer Award, and the United Nations Environment Program honored him with its Champions of the Earth Lifetime Achievement Award, the UN's highest environmental honor. Dallas Goldtooth is an Ashanti Dakota and Dene man from the village of Kasavafi within the territory of the Osheti-Shakawan. He is the national Keep It in the Ground campaigner for the Indigenous Environmental Network, focusing his work on uplifting and supporting frontline Indigenous communities fighting fossil fuel extraction on Indigenous lands. He has traveled extensively across North America as a public speaker and organizer, addressing the needs and issues that affect Indigenous peoples today. Mr. Goldtooth is also a Dakota cultural language teacher, nonviolent direct action trainer, and was one of the outstanding water protectors at Standing Rock Osheti-Sakowin camp fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline. Mr. Goldtooth is a co-founder of the Indigenous comedy troupe, the 1491s, as well as a poet, journalist, traditional artist, powwow MC, and comedian. And it's good to reconnect with you, Dallas. Kian Go is an assistant professor of urban planning at UCLA Lesson School of Public Affairs. She researches the relationship between urban ecological design, spatial politics, and the social mobilization in the context of climate change and global urbanization. Dr. Go's current research investigates the spatial politics of urban climate change responses with fieldwork sites in North America, Southeast Asia, and Europe. As a professional architect, she co-founded the design firm Super Interesting, and with an exclamation mark, and has practiced with Weiss, Manfredi, and MVRDB. Dr. Go's forthcoming book, Form and Flow, The Spatial Politics of Urban Resilience and Climate Justice, will be published by the MIT Press in 2021. So before we get started, a brief comment on process. Students developed 4 themes they wanted to discuss today. We will dedicate about 20 minutes to each of the 4 themes. Each guest will respond to each of the themes, and we will have a student representative participating in each of the thematic discussions. So the first set of questions that we're going to present to our panel has to do with current efforts. What are folks doing, how, and why? The questions are, what is the pressing climate justice issue you're working on, and what are some of the challenges you're facing as you try to address it? How do you view your work as advancing climate justice, and what motivates you to do this work? What might have been missing from your education as it relates to climate justice? And I'm happy to have our guests step in, or I'll call on folks. Kian, did I see you nudge forward?
Oh my God. I mean, I did nudge forward, not necessarily to be the one to start. I'm happy to start though. Firstly, thank you, Miriam, for the invitation, and thank you, UT Austin for having us here. Thanks also to Leora and to Alan. It's a real pleasure to be here today. It's a pleasure and privilege, and I said this earlier, to be having this conversation with my co-panelists. I think in so many ways, I identify as an architect. I actually do. I identify as an architect and an urban planning researcher. So my professional background is in architecture, and right now I do essentially social science urban planning research on the politics around urban climate change responses. And I really learn from, well, a variety of different points of view, different modes of knowledges to help me do my work. But with regards to issues of climate change and inequality, I have to say that the main drivers, the main motivations, the main inspirations that have helped me in recent years has been the now quite like long environmental justice movement and scholarship that Dr. Bullard has been so much a part of, and the increasingly, I think, powerful and especially powerful in arenas like my fields, work of indigenous rights activists who are fighting for their land and water. And so for me, being here as a designer, as an architect, and as an urban researcher with my co-panelists is just like a real honor. So that's my first thing I'll say. So I'm trained as an architect. I spent more than a decade or so working in New York City. First in I would say fairly high design arenas. Like I worked with Weissman Freddy for several years on projects like campus centers, libraries, honing, I think, as it were, the skills, the expertise around architectural design. And that was great. Like I love architecture. I love being able to shape the built environment, to envision different kinds of social and spatial uses in cities. And I still do. I think it's such a powerful place to be in. And at the same time, I was finding out that there were so many things about the sites and the neighborhoods that I was working in as an architect that I just really wanted to know more about. I wanted to know about the fragile ecologies in places like the industrial ecologies, really, in places like Red Hook, Brooklyn, that I spent some time working as an architect in. I'll talk more about that throughout today. And the contentious politics around these places and cities where there have been, in so many places, systemic disinvestment, oppressive and racist policing, and intergenerational poverty that's very place-based, race-based, class-based. And so that prompted me to shift my work from an architect per se to look more at the political and environmental problems in cities, which led me to researching urban climate change. And so my current work, as Miriam was saying, is on the spatial politics of urban climate change responses. And I basically spent on this one project about 8 years through my doctoral studies and beyond. And it particularly focuses on urban climate change responses in New York City, primarily after Hurricane Sandy, in Jakarta, Indonesia, a city that confronts chronic and severe flooding, and in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands, a city that is often held up as a kind of model of best practices around water management and environmental planning. And what I do in this project is to trace the flows of ideas and influence and capital among these different sites and projects. Why are the urban climate change responses projects proposed for these sites, the ones that the folks in power, the political and economic elites in these cities think are the best ones to protect places and people from the impacts of climate change? And are there other alternative ideas as to what these cities should do? So I look at the more I don't want to overplay the binary distinction here, but I look at the more high profile, generally top down, large scale climate plans. And I look at the grassroots environmental movements, the social movements, who often rise in response to what they're seeing as being unjust and exclusionary climate response projects. So the main thing here is, as we all know, climate change may be generalized. It impacts everywhere and all places, but not in equal ways. So the impacts of climate change are disparate, mostly people of color, working class folks, in both global north and south, but particularly like the least industrialized countries of the global south, low-lying island nations are being affected first and most. So the processes of climate change may be generalized and everywhere, but its impacts are very disparate and often quite localized. Wait, why am I saying this now? Okay, I'm losing my train of thought here. But so what I do is to look at the responses among grassroots movements against what they're seeing are exclusionary climate plans. So not only are the impacts of climate change unequal, but often the urban responses to projected climate impacts are not justly produced. So they're planned often to protect centers of economic growth. They're planned to protect particular places in cities that are either more wealthy or planned to be developed in ways that are not inclusive. And so looking as well to these to the plans themselves and what groups on the ground, these grassroots social movements would like to see in response. So on the one hand, this new wave of generally top-down global interventions, and on the other hand, rising social movements who often also take cues from and use the aspects of professional urban design and planning, utilizing planning and design strategies, and building up from very local movements to more network, cross-scalar, collaborative movements to challenge the unjust plans. So that's what I've been looking at in these three different sites. The book that I have coming out, I'm really excited about this because, well, it's a long time coming, but I think it really synthesizes some of that work together. So I've gone on for quite a bit, but I would say I'll just end with 3 points here. The 3 things that I think I'm most invested in unearthing. First, the relationship between the biophysical and ecological processes of urban landscapes and the sociopolitics of place. And I think when we're looking at climate justice, we need to think of these things together and really understand the relationships between them. Biophysical, ecological processes and sociopolitics at the same time. And then second, how do we conceptualize, how do we understand the multi-scalar urban environmental challenges of climate change and place-based and historically based embodied positionality? So what does it mean to look from and to understand the future of urban environments as a positional embodied person with a different view of the world than is generally understood by planners, policymakers, and architects? And then third, how do we then the tension here, how do we as planners and designers concerned with justice conceive of more than local approaches to issues of justice when addressing the scopes and scales of climate imperatives? So if climate change impacts places differently, but is a global, multi-scale, and really historical process, how do we think about local issues of injustice in a way that is, well, beyond the local? That how do we consider multiple injustices across time when we're doing our work? And that's really what, if anything, keeps me up at night. That question about how to think about and build more than local movements of justice is what it is. And I have some other responses to things like, what did I not know when I started doing this work? But I'll pause a minute because I've been talking too much.
Thank you, Kian. So let's have Dr. Bullard chime in, and then we'll hear from Dallas and Sari Albornoz, who's a student representative on this panel.
Okay, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be on this panel and to express some views that in terms of how things connect. And right now, what I am invested in is creating a model and infrastructure for educating, training the next generation of leaders, and particularly from our emerging majority in this country. And the fact that by 2045, in roughly 25 years, this country will be majority people of color. And so when we talk about the underrepresentation of people of color in the fields related to climate, environment, health, STEM, etc., then it is not enough just to talk about it. We need a plan. So a colleague and I, Dr. Beverly Wright, who's in New Orleans, Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. She used to be at Xavier and Dillard, but now she has her own 501c, the Deep South Center, Inc. We like 7 years ago, we developed the HBCU Climate Change Consortium. And the consortium also has a partnership with community-based organizations that are based in the cities, locations where our schools are located. When we drill down, there are 104 Black colleges and universities spread in 16 states. But when we talk about the tip of the spear, we're talking about 5 Gulf Coast states, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida. In these 5 states, there are 43 HBCUs. And so what our initiative is to look at the issues around defining what climate justice is. Climate justice is environmental justice, is racial justice, economic justice, food justice, health justice, energy justice, and criminal justice. The underlying framing is an equity lens, and the whole issue of this overlay system is racism. So if you look at systemic racism and the impact that systemic racism has on these other justice outcomes or injustice, you can see how connecting the dots makes for a very powerful model. And so if we talk about the impact of decades, in some cases centuries, of systemic racism and the impact of place and racialized place, allocation of resources, pushing people into spaces and places, and having it codified in law, whether in Plessy v. Ferguson, or whether in dismantling that in Texas with Sweat v. Painter, human sweat, with the creation of Texas Southern University or Thurgood Marshall School of Law, and moving to 1954 Brown versus Board of Education, 1964 Civil Rights Act, and you start going, the fact that if we are to achieve any level of environmental justice and climate justice, economic justice, and racial justice, we have to deal with structural features that allocate the good things for one side and the bad things for the other. Understanding that and doing the kinds of research that has allowed for advancing methodologies and tools and the ways of displaying research findings, data, etc., has made a difference in the way that we communicate out the findings and the results to get people to understand, and hopefully policymakers and planners and architects and those who impact the built environment to see the connectivity between our systems that are set up, and oftentimes systems that are unequal and provide for advantages and disadvantages and privileges and locking people out. That the way that we create a pathway for climate justice and environmental justice and those other justice is to acknowledge and to put in place mechanisms to dismantle those unequal systems that provide unequal results. And the way that I see advancing climate justice and environmental justice in the work that I do along with others is to look at it from an interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary framework, and to not allow departments or schools or confined kinds of way of thinking to limit the potential. And I think, when I started my work back in 1978 in Houston, Texas, 2 years out of graduate school, none of this framing existed. And the idea of the built environment in Houston, where there's no zoning and decisions being made where to put locally unwanted land uses, it was not based on logic. It was not based on science other than political science. And the first case to a lawsuit to challenge environmental racism happened to be in a city that doesn't have zoning, and the research was done by a university that was founded by racism under Jim Crow, and the idea of discovering this whole framework was accidental. That was not my training in environment. I was a sociologist doing research on demography, looking at housing and residential segregation. But to see the connection between where you live, your zip code, and what you get in your neighborhood that's good or bad was uncovered in a first lawsuit challenging environmental racism, Bean versus Southwestern Waste Management Corporation, that was filed by Linda McKeever Bullard, my wife. I was asked to collect data for the lawsuit. I had 10 students in my research methods class. We did the study. We found that 5 out of 5 of the city-owned landfills, 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators were located in Black neighborhoods. 3 out of 4 of the privately owned landfills in Black neighborhoods. Now, this is a place that doesn't have zoning, so unofficially, power arrangements push garbage on Black people, even though Blacks made up only 25% of the population from the 20s up to 1978. The point I'm making on that is that decisions that are made by governmental entities and planners, architects, private entities go hand in hand in creating racialized place, and that racialized place creates inequality, pushing people in on to neighborhoods that are low-lying, prone to flooding, lots of pollution, no amenities, no flood protection. This is not accidental, but the racism that's embedded in the system is what allows that to happen. And so in order to challenge that, you have to have an anti-racist paradigm to confront that. And that's what, that's how my work, I see my work as contributing to dismantling that system that creates environmental inequality, climate inequality, education inequality, health inequality, energy, land use, parks and green space inequality. You start looking at the inequality, and you can go back to that culprit of racial redlining and discrimination as it gets sent forward. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Bullard. Dallas, we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Greetings. Hamatakapi, Chante Washte, Nape Chius Apido, Yushki Wachiankapi, Dallas Goldtooth, Tamaki Apido. My name is Dallas Goldtooth. I'm a Dakota and Dene man from my homelands of Dakota Territory of so-called Minnesota. Miriam, it's a pleasure to see you once again. Go Bears, Cal alumni, good to see you. And you did a great job on pronouncing all the Dakota words in my introduction. I'd like to give a shout out to Dr. Robert Bullard. My dad says hello and send good greetings to you, and much love. And I'm very happy to be on this panel with you. You know, amazing to hear all the experience being brought into this space. I'm here with my son Wakpa, who's now asleep. You probably saw him earlier. I was trying to get him to sleep here. So what I enjoy, if there's any joy to be expressed out of this year of dealing with the pandemic, is I've had a lot more personal time with my family, and my family has been much more engaged and involved in the work that I do, which is the very tenet of climate justice and the work that we do to protect our communities for the next 7 generations of life. So I had to show off, though. I had to put a little hat on him, the same as my hat, so y'all heard. But there's so much to be said, right? And I'm looking at the questions here, and I'm pondering the pressing issue. So I am the Keep It in the Ground campaigner for the Indigenous Environmental Network. IEN is a national, or in many ways an international, network of frontline grassroots Indigenous communities who are fighting to protect the sacredness of Mother Earth. It is a network of communities who are fighting a wide variety of extractive industries who are not only plundering the natural resources within their local ecosystems, but are literally threatening the lives of their communities and people. I'm happy to see that over the past 15, even 20 years, a greater recognition of how extractive industry and our addiction to fossil fuels literally diminishes the life of our people and our communities, and also creates situations where we see increased risk of sexual and domestic violence in our communities. And so I would not be here if it wasn't for the tremendous work of our elders and people who've been fighting on the front lines in the classrooms and in boardrooms, wherever it may be, to advocate for a wider perspective that is climate justice and environmental justice. My campaign's about keeping it in the ground. I mean, it's really focused on fossil fuels, also a recognition of uranium and nuclear development as key. Those are 2 key aspects of the campaign I worked on. And I guess I'll say this. I think it's been said many times before, but like, we are so often, when we're asked, okay, what's the fight? What's the issue? What's the issue here? We are pressed to respond in a way that is very limiting to a certain extent, because we're like, okay, I'm gonna tell you about the urgent shit that's happening right now. This has got to get stopped because it's doing this. We got to stop that. And that's very much true. You're thinking about the pipelines that are being pushed across our lands right now to lock this country into more fossil fuel expansion. You think about, I could mention the the expansion of the refineries in the Gulf Coast area to feed the expansion of liquefied natural gas and fracking development that's coming out of Western Texas and as far away as the Four Corners region of the United States. I could talk about, the expansion of the petrochemical industry as the industry is making a shift to more plastic development because they're seeing the forecast that fossil fuel usage is on the downturn. And so they have to use those fossil fuels for something. And so we're seeing in Louisiana and Texas, up in the Ohio River Valley, a building out of cracker plants and other companies who want to develop more plastics. I could talk about all that stuff like I just did, but it's all meaningless if we do not address the elephant in the room that is capitalism. If we do not address the struggle as we try to develop a climate justice framework to the work that we're doing, the wall that we often hit upon, or one of the barriers that we encounter, is this neoliberal agenda that the response to the crisis should be an individual response and less of a collective response. There's an emphasis that, hey, as long as you're buying that Prius, as long as you are making sure you got the right light bulbs, you're a part of this effort. As long as you are making sure you're signing up for those offsets when you fly across this country, you're doing your part. And it doesn't speak to the systemic inequities that's inherent in our society. And I feel inspired by what happened in 2020 with the mobilization that we've seen to speak to the murdering of Black men and women and other relatives by police, that we are exposing those systemic inequities in our society and saying, look, we cannot rely upon communities to play whack-a-mole piece by piece by piece, because that's not going to answer the problem. And the same thing, I think what happens there is the exact same thing that's happening in the other space that we call environmental justice. And I appreciate what Dr. Bullard had said is they're connected. Climate justice really isn't just about the environment. It's about all levels of our society and how we relate to one another in the world around us. And if we are not addressing that holistic approach to relationship, then we're going to fail. So how I view my work as advancing climate justice. Right now, we are doing this coordinated campaign, so it really speaks to I'm going to speak to the campaign work I'm working on right now. It's a campaign called Build Back Fossil Free, and it's targeting President Biden to use his executive action power, executive authority, to do a number of decisive actions to set us on the right direction. The tenets of the Build Back Fossil Free campaign really is, look, hey, Mr. President Biden, we all know how you got into that office is because of people of color that got you in that place. And with that vote, there's a mandate to stand up in defense of our communities. And we're going to hold you accountable to that. And one of the core tenets of that is we have to end the sacrificing of communities of color for our addiction to fossil fuels. And it's about connecting those struggles. So a lot of folks know about Keystone XL Pipeline. We built that up. That was a massive, massive fight. We mobilized thousands of people. It was a unprecedented and unlikely alliance of basically, I'm gonna tell y'all, that fight, if you don't know about Keystone XL Pipeline, check it out. But there's lots of history there. But through that fight, we had straight up hard right, Republican farmers and ranchers standing side by side with a lot of Native folks who are predominantly left-leaning on a common issue. And we were able to have, through just solid community organizing, getting people in space, being principled in our organizing, we were able to have good conversation about fossil fuels, moving away from it. And actually at the end of the day, you had straight up the most Republican of Republican, gun-toting Nebraska ranchers saying, you know what? Indigenous peoples, we need to recognize their rights. We need to stand up in defense of Indigenous communities. And that was pretty powerful. But we just recently got a win on that. But we recognize, like, hey, we can't declare a victory if you stop one pipeline while 3 others are going through. We can't declare a victory that you stop one project, but we're still exporting a massive amount of fossil fuels out of Texas and Louisiana, and it's those communities in Houston, those communities down in Corpus Christi who are dealing with the effects of that. Like, we have to really push back collectively in collaboration. And there was an article that just came out, Dr. Bullard was in it, that talked about the mobilization of the grassroots movement, the EJ community in this country to push back. So that's what motivates me, is that we're connecting the dots. Our communities are building upon the work our folks have been doing for generations now. And I'm inspired. Like, I'm very inspired for the direction we're going. The last thing is missing from my education as it relates to climate justice. Honestly, like, my dad is Tom Goldtooth. He's the director of the Indigenous Environmental Network. I grew up in the movement. It's a cliche as it is. I grew up in this movement, going to all these different meetings and hearing people talk boring talks about everything. And so I have the privilege of that experience. But organizing in this space has been on the job training, like how to bring people together and how to come to collective agreement to build collective power. I think get educated on that. It was like, that was on the ground, that was in the field, and listening and watching other people do it. And I think that's an immense challenge right now. Well, one, because of the pandemic and everyone's on cameras, but even before that and after we come out of this, is how do we engage folks that's not just digitally? How do we actually meet folks face to face, and symbolically, but also physically, to build collective power? So I'll check there. I'm gonna let you know, I dropped the F-bomb. I'm really holding back. I swear a lot. I curse a lot. He's asleep, so he can't hear nothing. I know it's probably going in there somewhere in his brain, but I'm gonna slide out a few more 4-letter words here and there as we go along. Check.
Thank you, Dallas. Let's hear from Saudi. And actually, I want to point out that some of the questions that we have coming up speak to several of the themes our speakers have already raised. Collective action, movements, personal experience, and how it channels our work.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, first I want to say I am just so honored and humbled to be able to be a co-panelist next to all of you panelists. I have been inspired by your work. And I'm eager to read more of what you've written. It's a huge honor. So just want to say that first. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing that relates to climate justice, and kind of speaking to what everyone has already addressed. Climate justice is interrelated with so much. It's impossible to separate it out because it's just connected to everything. And the issue that I work on, food justice, is similar. There are so many intersecting issues that I see food justice work addressing. And so to me, food justice is about transforming urban landscapes so that we can integrate biodiverse green spaces with all of the kind of climate-related benefits those bring. And then also it's about increasing food production so that there can be better food access, equity, and resilience in terms of healthy food. And then it's about strengthening people's connection with food and health and the rest of nature. That's what food justice work is about to me, among other things. A little bit more specifically, I'm working on 2 projects to try to advance food justice, one of which is actually my research for my professional report for the Community and Regional Planning Program, which I'm finishing up right now. And that research is with the city of Austin, and we're looking into the possibility of inviting community sustainable agriculture projects onto floodplain buyout lands, specifically here in Austin in the Lower Onion Creek floodplain buyout area, which is in Southeast Austin. And we're also looking at, or I'm in my research looking at, what would that work look like if racial equity were prioritized? And I find this work, or this project, this research, really interesting because as climate change unfolds, there are going to be more places in our cities where people can't live anymore. The buyouts were a voluntary buyout program where people who were living in a very hazard-prone area were offered the opportunity to have the city purchase their house so that they could move someplace else safer. And so a whole neighborhood that had like 800 houses is now this open area of green space. So, and that some people talk about that as managed retreat. So in these situations where we have these pieces of land where people can't really live safely anymore because of, flooding impacts, there is an opportunity to activate those spaces for community benefit. So we're looking at, can people grow food here? And can all those benefits that come from food cultivation, collaborative food cultivation, unfold here? But it's also a delicate issue because, as Dr. Bullard mentioned, a lot of these spaces where people are living in flood-prone, hazard-prone areas, those are communities of color and low-income communities because the land values are lower there. Nobody wants to live where it's dangerous. And so these are communities that the buyouts may be displacing even as they move people to safer ground. Communities are getting fragmented. And also, as we look at creating these beautiful amenities, hopefully supported by community involvement and participation and hopefully lending community benefits. But as we create these amenities together in these newly vacant spaces, is that going to increase gentrification pressures? Will those neighborhoods become more appealing so that now the very people who are investing this love and work and effort into this beneficial use, are they going to get pushed out? And in Austin, where we are already experiencing huge growth, huge gentrification impacts, that's something that really concerns me and something that really makes it important to sort of use a racial equity lens in kind of figuring out how to do this work. So I won't talk more about that, even though I could talk about it for longer. The other project that I'm working on related to food justice is an organization that I started with 4 co-founders this past summer called Fruitful Commons. And that is an organization where we are hoping to be able to support neighborhood leaders and organizations to grow through food, strengthen communities, and foster stewardship of the natural commons. And the reason we want to do that is because we know that there are already inspired leaders, powerful inspired leaders who have a vision of growing food with their neighbors in Austin. And they know that when you grow food together with your neighbors, you're getting connected to the earth, you're getting connected to your neighbors, you have food access, you're building community resilience together. But sometimes people are missing something. They might not have the resources they need, or they might be missing a little bit of information, or they might need some administrative support. So we want to be able to come in and support people. Like I wanted to mention this woman, Angela Bigham, who I'm mentioning because she inspires me every time I talk to her. I get excited about what she's doing from the way she talks about it. She started this project called St. John's Faith Community Garden, which is on a piece of land that's actually owned by a network of Black churches in Austin. She's growing food there, and she has this vision of helping people get reconnected with growing food in her community, her African-American community, and then achieving better health outcomes through having connection to this or better access to this fresh produce. She knows what she's doing. She doesn't need anybody to tell her what to do, but she mentions when I talk to her, I could really use help getting this water conserving irrigation system set up, or I could really use help getting grants so that we can take this work to the next level. And so that's what we're hoping to do in this organization is, can we connect people to money? Can we connect her with a designer or an irrigation specialist to help her get that set up? How can we help fill those gaps? So those are the 2 projects that I'm working on right now. And thinking about challenges that I've encountered doing this work, one is that any kind of community collaborative effort, there's going to be an opportunity cost for spending time doing that unpaid work when you could be spending your time earning wages. And so thinking about wanting to kind of lift up communities of color who want to do this work, there's always this tension with how do you follow the energy? How do you encourage sort of ownership and autonomy in the projects? but also sort of provide enough support so that you're not making unreasonable demands of people's time. So that's something that I think about a lot, and think about, like, are there ways to get people paid for their time? Like, what does that look like? And if anybody has ideas, I'd love to hear them because it's an ongoing challenge. The other challenge I see is that high land values threaten the availability of common spaces where these kinds of projects of growing food together can take place, because there's always going to be land uses that are more profitable compared with growing food together as a kind of community effort. So that's a tension. And then I think all of this has to do with advancing climate justice for a few reasons. Food justice in general, I think, is about chipping away at the dominance of the industrial food system, which has huge negative climate impacts. And it's also terribly oppressive, particularly to people of color. And so the more we can chip away at that system by creating alternative systems, the better. And then also sustainable and regenerative agriculture does a lot to mitigate climate change. It does things like increase the ability of soil to absorb water and infiltration. It, encourages trees to be planted, which brings shade to urban spaces and mitigates urban heat island effect, and a bunch of other good stuff. And then there's opportunities for community members in neighborhoods that may have been neglected in terms of things like being served by parks or other green spaces, to bring some of those benefits into their environments through these agriculture projects. And then finally, I think that it's about climate change, this work that I'm doing, because it's about cultivating people's awareness of and connection to the earth and its patterns and processes. And I really think that people are more able to love and fight for what they're acquainted with. So I want to close with, actually, before I say that, I also wanted to talk about what motivates me to work towards climate justice. And for me, it's just very simple. It feels like a moral imperative and also an existential issue. I think that those of us who are in a position of leverage and privilege to be able to fight to keep our home hospitable, the earth, have a responsibility to act. And then also because the same forces of extractive capitalism and racism and heteropatriarchy and colonialism that have gotten us to this place in the first place are always going to make it so that those hurt the most are the ones who have the least, and those who are benefiting are the ones who have the most. And so we know that means that the people who have the least are going to bear the brunt of climate change as it unfolds. And I think that's unacceptable. So finally, the thing I wanted to close with, I wanted to talk about what's been missing from my education related to climate change. And it actually makes me think about something way back in my education when I was in high school in the 90s here in Austin. And I learned later that where I went to high school was blocks away from the tank farm, which is this infamous in Austin environmental justice issue where multinational companies were storing petrochemicals in giant vats in a residential neighborhood. Absurd. This was happening. Poder, which is an environmental justice organization here in Austin, was actually founded around that movement. And they fought successfully to shut it down, which is amazing. And I didn't know that. I was in high school blocks away, and I had no idea. I was at a magnet program. Me and the other magnet kids got bussed in from elsewhere in Austin, and we never learned a thing about the neighborhood where we were in high school. Later, I realized that, and I was ashamed to realize how ignorant I was about the neighborhood where I went to high school. And so the reason I'm talking about that is because it would have been cool in my education to have an opportunity to learn about how what I cared so much about was manifesting tangibly right in my home. And I could have been doing something about it, or at least learning about it. So yeah, I guess I kind of carry that with me, and it reminds me to just look around me and think about my immediate environment and how I can do the work that I want to do where I am. So yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sadi. And I want to acknowledge that we've started getting some questions, both in the question box and in the chat. We're going to have 15 to 20 minutes for questions at the end. I am going to mention already, though, that we've gone through one of 4 themes, and we want to make sure to hear from all of our students. So we want to get our responses down to just a few minutes to try to get through all of them, because there's a lot of wisdom we're trying to download from everyone today, and we want to make sure to get it all out there. We're not able to answer everything today. As everyone has alluded to, these are ongoing conversations that we're going to continue to engage with each other on. So the next theme has to do very specifically with our role as urban planners and designers. We're going to have as our student representative, Joseph Chandler. And what students want to know on this topic is, as we work with communities to plan and design the built environment, how can we engage more wholeheartedly with climate justice in our projects and processes? Working in carbon dependent fields, often using materials with large carbon footprints and extracting building materials from our lands, how can we configure our tools and make decisions that serve historically marginalized communities' priorities and health? What is the role of creativity in advancing climate justice? Let's have Dallas, can you kick us off on this one?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm baby free right now. Yay! Oh, all right. I'll try to keep it. I think that one, trying to get wrap my mind around it. One, for students and folks who are in this field are emerging to go into the commercial world or the professional world, it is one, having that good conversation, examining the alternatives, right? Is like, I think oftentimes what we're faced of, oftentimes what we are faced against is the lack of options, right? That folks say, well, hey, we don't have any options. This is all we got. This is all we have to work with. And we have to allow ourselves the space to be innovative, to radically imagine a different future using resources and tools that we may not have right now or access, or that are not, that are actually accessible for communities. So I think that, so I think that's a priority, is like to instigate the conversation about what is the status quo and what about that can we shake up and change. The other part, the question about creativity, I mean, dude, this fight is all about creativity. I think I've always heard that there was a teaching I heard from some solid organizers. There's this direct action organization called the Ruckus Society that goes way back, based out of the Bay Area. And they have a mantra of that, you know, our job is to make our fight irresistible. We do that through art. We do that through using our creativity to design a world that people want to be in. So that's what I would have to say for folks here. Okay.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is when we talk about planning with communities and designing with communities, is to have a deep respect for community knowledge, indigenous knowledge, people knowledge that may not necessarily come from textbooks, but really comes from living, learning, and that has been passed down in a way that has enhanced survivability of people and culture. And the whole idea of it was always a saying when we were building our environmental justice movement early on, is that lawyers on tap, not on top. And we should not leave planning just to planners. So the concept of bringing in that community knowledge and respecting that knowledge and the way of knowing. There are ways of knowing that may not necessarily be, quote, the scientific method, but there are ways of knowing. And I think the idea of listening to communities and understanding that when you listen to communities, and particularly listening to elders, listening to people that have seen change over a period of time and can inform new plans and new models and how you build institutions so that the human network or and the social networks will thrive and last as long as the built infrastructure. So oftentimes we build stuff, and somehow the buildings themselves outlast the social infrastructure, because there has been no relationship between the building and the people. And oftentimes the building themselves, the building infrastructure themselves can be disintegrative. And so how do we integrate and make sure that that's there? And there are a number of tools that we can use to do that. And a community-based participatory research, research to action, community GIS. I mean, when you put community in it, I think you can have a better product. And the creative nature of this, meaning that sometimes we have to get off the blueprint. And if there's a recipe for something and we want to make it better in some ways, sometimes we may have to tweak the recipe. And music, coming from an African culture, music, dance, and poetry, that the humanities, that culture has always been a way that we've infused that into trying to dismantle and confront those oppressive systems. And I think we can do that by having design and culture, the art, liberation music, and liberation design. Whether it's a mural depicting John Lewis as 10 stories high as a hero or whatever, or other kinds of ways to do that. And so it's a mixed discipline kind of way to do the planning and design.
Thanks. And just briefly, I'll make 2 quick points. One, with regard to this, is that I think, for my part, I'm trying to learn much more about the specifics about the climate justice movement. I'm really inspired by the ways in which this movement has grown from both very local, place-based, and historically based, like farmers, fisher folks, indigenous rights activists on the ground, linked up often with a global network of activism, often through the multilateral meetings, such as the COP meetings. Like the COP meetings may have been ineffective. The UN COP meetings may have been ineffective on one level. On another level, they've enabled these grassroots groups to show force and to make some demands. And so I think that climate justice actually extends a lot of the previous, the growing environmental justice movement, to link these kinds of historically and place-based movements with, for instance, the anti-capitalist, anti-globalization movements that we saw in Seattle in the 1990s. And I think that kind of broad movement building is something that designers and planners can really learn from. And then in terms of like our own as a designer, as a planner, the way we can engage is, well, as Dr. Bullard said, we these kinds of that we need to plan, but it's not only through planners and professional designers. We can look to movements from the ground up to see their visions, their goals for the future, and their ways of knowing what this future can be. But I think it works 2 ways. I think when I look at, for instance, the organizing among informal settlement activists in Jakarta, one of the ways that they've been able to contest some of the top-down city plans is to make their own visions. And this is often in collaboration with community architects, community urban designers, to show that there are concrete visions of the future that are different from what has been posed before. And so we, like, let's not like divest or ignore our own training as planners and designers, and how that knowledge, those tools can be brought to bear to build these images of futures that are more tied to the kinds of political agendas that we want to work for.
I just want to say it's a huge honor to be speaking with y'all. I'm feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome, so just letting you know. But off of what Dr. Bullard has researched so extensively, I believe engaging wholeheartedly in climate justice requires an understanding that color and zip code determines one's exposure to toxic air, waste, and facilities, and exposure to natural disasters such as flooding, which I've seen in Katrina and Harvey. So these dangers are also magnified right now by disparities in economic security and access to healthcare. And this is made glaringly obvious by COVID-19's disproportionate exposure and lethality to Indigenous communities and communities of color. This COVID-19 crisis has also amplified and shown the consequences of ignoring the scientists and experts, downplaying risk, and taking a short-term approach at the highest levels of our government. As we've touched on before, it also requires an understanding that the real injustice is that Indigenous and poor communities who have contributed the least to the carbon in the atmosphere will suffer the most. So I think that conversation needs to be had in our classrooms and with our families. When we talk about the tools to make decisions and serve historically marginalized communities, I think the best tool we have as designers is our ears, which is also what Dr. Bullard mentioned. I'm inspired by the work of Liz Ogbu in community design to drive the research and decision-making. I think presenting a design is more than just saying, here's what we propose. It's actively engaging and involving the people who have the most to lose at the seat of the decision-making process. There's also lots of other designers like Gina Ford of Agency Landscape that engage in that practice. But I think as architects and as students, we need to ask ourselves, who is our architecture really serving? I also think that pedagogically, we need to consider sustainability at the very beginning of a design process, from the site to its occupants, to the climate, the lighting, and considering the energy life cycle, embodied energy, and program of our architecture. And these ideas cannot be ignored in the evaluation of our work. And then on the subject of creativity, as Dallas said, the climate crisis is going to require bold action and extreme creativity. So I think this is where students and activists play a huge role, because we can see these issues with a fresh set of eyes. How are we valuing good design? Is there something more than form and aesthetics we need to be looking at? Is a building like the Bank of America Tower, 1,200 foot tall skyscraper made of glass and steel, is that really a LEED platinum building? And should we be looking towards buildings like that as a model for sustainability if the building is vacant right now because everyone's on Zoom? So it's going to require a lot of us to ask a lot of questions. How do we achieve density in our urban centers without displacing the most vulnerable? How can we apply sustainable design to the developing world where we're going to see most emissions in the next 50 years? How can we prepare urban centers like Mexico City for a water crisis, Houston for flooding, and Miami and Manhattan for sea level rise? How can we make the argument in our system of capitalism for sustainable design, or how do we change that system to provide better quality of life for its people? And I think as designers, we've been complicit in the destruction of our environment. So how can we leave the environment better than we found it? Well, I think it's an act of hubris to think that we can act alone in the climate crisis. We need to encourage collaboration across fields like the conversation we're having today. We need to advocate for political and societal change, and we need to listen and engage. I think this is the most important thing: listen and engage to those whose decisions we affect. and actively support equity in our pedagogy and practice.
Thank you, everyone. And I want to acknowledge we're getting more questions in the question box. And the next one, the next theme actually responds to one of them. It's about engaging in some auto-critique. Our student representative will be Taylor Davis. This has to do with professional tensions. While UT engages in many sustainable practices in the design and functions and operations of its campus, it also holds significant investments in oil and oil lands that afford it to function at the high level that it does. Investments that historically have expanded into and displaced communities of color. This is an example of a kind of tension that many planners and designers experience and negotiate every day. The misalignment between our values and the organizations we work for. What happens when institutions have political obligations and sway over government? How do you do this work and negotiate these incongruities? How do you simultaneously advance an organization and social justice? And I'm going to have Dr. Bullard kick us off for this one.
Glad to. Again, there's always tension involving state actors, whether it's the Texas Department of Health or University of Texas or Texas Southern. Going back to my 1978 experience when my wife asked me to collect data for her lawsuit that she had sued the Texas Department of Health. I worked for a state university called Texas Southern University. So she actually sued my employer. Should I have taken that case untenured? Well, the justice question was yes. The fact that there are times when you have to go against the fact that the state of Texas was actually contributing to dumping on Black people. Now, if you fast forward and look at the whole idea of oil money, and the extent to which oil money creates opportunities and creates the development of a major research university, which provide top-notch education for students. Look at the other side of that in terms of the idea of what's happening on the front end of the extraction, where it's occurring, where the refinery is occurring, and you'll see that the communities that are getting hit hard by that extraction and by that refinery and the production, et cetera, they're experiencing tremendous impacts in terms of pollution, their property values lowered, the quality of life lowered. And if you look at major spots where I'm talking about, Port Arthur, Texas, Houston Ship Channel, Corpus Christi, you start naming the places, and the idea of what is the responsibility of the state and the university, and at what point when the last drop of oil will get pulled, and to what extent will there be some kind of action taken to repair the damage done to those communities that are fence lines? There's a name for it. I won't say reparation, but I'll say repair. And so the idea is that the whole idea of divest and what that means in Connecticut versus Texas, and it's different. It's very different. The lens in which you apply is very different. But the idea of the justice question on the ground, or the most impacted, it doesn't vary from Louisiana, Cancer Alley, North Richmond, with Chevron, with Southwest Detroit, with Marathon, or I could name the places, South Philly with
Dr. Bullard, you muted yourself.
Can you hear me now? Okay, so the idea of the framing has to be in terms of if you're calling the trade-offs as business as usual, or not even calling them a trade-off, you're calling them negative externalities and how they are regressive on the people who are least able to afford or attend these great universities.
Thank you. So we'll have Dallas go ahead, and then Keon, and then we'll have Taylor chime in.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
First of all, I'm gonna drop into the chat here an amazing pamphlet, organizing pamphlet folks can use that directly addresses a campus guide to fossil fuel divestment, put together by some amazing trainers with 350.org and a number of other organizations. Definitely check that out. And the talking point, and this is proven, this has worked, right? And it is different. The dynamics are different. I respect that. Texas is a whole different game than the majority of other places in the country. But first of all, the fossil fuel industry is dying. You know, even though it has it still has a stranglehold over our economy in many ways, even though it's literally choking the air for a lot of folks, a lot of communities of color in this country, it is declining. And so one of the prime arguments for any campus, any college, or any public institution is that is actually it's a risky investment in the long term to keep your money in fossil fuels. As the climate crisis increases, the risk of financing and investing your money in fossil fuels increases as well, and that's backed up. And so there's legitimate arguments more than just the moral stand of protecting communities of color and addressing climate change. There actually are fiduciary arguments that can be presented. So I definitely encourage you to check out that guide to push that if folks are interested to mobilize and organize in their community, they can do that. And we don't I went to school at a public institution, University of California, and especially for public institutions, you have no idea how big those endowments are and how they utilize endowments and how they depend on the endowments and the investments of those endowments. And so go after the endowments and put pressure on the board of directors and everyone across the board. I wholeheartedly support that. I think I'll just stop there for now. Check out the pamphlet. I'd like to hear Dr. Go.
Thank you. Dallas, great timing. So I work at UCLA. So the state of California is my employer. And as of mid last year, apparently we have divested from fossil fuels for the UC. It was a stated goal and apparently it was completed. And it was really, a lot of this came from student and staff and faculty organizing around it, pushing the chancellors and the board to get on board. And what was interesting is when they made this announcement, the manager of our investments made the point that it wasn't really because of the organizing. It's because, they are in the business of making money for the UC, and they didn't see fossil fuels as a long-term money-making possibility, echoing what Dallas has said. So on the one hand, it's I think that's great. I'm happy that our institution has taken that path. But I'm also not sure whether we have changed our outlook on what investments are for, and what really is our goal as a public university. And I think that remains something that we organize for. That I will say this: I think we're the best public. I think we are an excellent public university system. I won't say in the best. I think we're an excellent public university system in a major economy we can do better. We can take steps to make that world what we want, you know, and if not us, then who? So that's what I'll say about that. The other thing is this whole idea of institutions. So Dallas put a pamphlet in, I'll put another, which Dallas, you maybe co-wrote even. So I take a lot of cues from what the Indigenous Action Media has put forth, this short thing called Accomplices Not Allies. And it really asks us, those of us with institutional power, like to what extent we're willing to betray our institutions, to leverage resources, to shift our resources to places that we feel that looking at what Dr. Bullard was saying, through a justice lens, we can really put that we can really believe in. And one of the things that I think it really, I think it's powerful about what the Accomplices Not Allies framing asks us is that this is not a trivial question. Am I willing to betray my institution? I think sometimes, yeah, for sure. Like, am I willing to leverage resources that I have access to? 100%. But like, it's also my livelihood. And so those of us working through this as planners, as faculty members, as researchers, we have to think through for ourselves and our collectives to what extent we're willing to do that for the kind of the kinds of the world that we want. That's it.
If I may, I just have a quick follow-up and just say, like, I don't know if it's like hitting folks, but this movement to call out white supremacy within our society that was born out of the tremendous mobilization within Black communities to address the killings of Black folks by the hands of police is directly connected to the issue of climate justice and environmental justice. They're of the same beast. And so we saw a mass movement of folks interrogating how white supremacy interacts on the daily life. We saw people have questions about how their governments, their businesses, their jobs, their institutions are feeding into white supremacy. And that same interrogation speaks to what we're talking about here as far as environmental justice and climate justice. That white supremacy is operating at the same level as all the other struggles that we're dealing with that is a result of capitalism. And I just want to speak that out. Like, I want to encourage folks to not say, oh, okay, the conversation on white supremacy, that's about standing solidarity with Black folks. No, that's about dismantling a system that affects each and every one of us. And that is what being an accomplice is about. It's saying, oh, I'm just going to do what little bit I can do to alleviate potentially something over there. No, it's about fundamentally going against your own self-interest for the betterment of everybody around you. So I just want to share that.
Thank you for the follow-up, Dallas. And now we're going to have Taylor Davis contributing to the question.
Thanks, Miriam. And thank you to all of the panelists that I'm joined with here today. It's a great honor to be speaking with you all. This question for me really brought up sort of a personal anecdote. When I first came to UT, I was confronted by the popular use of this term 40 acres, which of course I came to understand as referring to UT's original 40 acres that they stood on when they first opened. But for me, having never heard that spatial terminology before, except in the context of a promise that was given to those who were freed, 40 acres and a mule. So I was really triggered every time I would see, 40 acres here, 40 acres there, and I couldn't understand why. And I was completing some research for a class and I brought this up. I brought up sort of this kind of context for me of broken promises and lost histories. And a history teacher whom I really respected and admired reached out to me, and she asked me sort of, where did you find this information about 40 acres and a mule? I've never heard of this before. What's your source? And I didn't have a source. This was something that had been taught to me since I was a small child. My parents owned a Black bookstore in Dallas, Texas. When I was growing up, I was surrounded by African-American literature and African-American tales. But really a lot of it was just stories and words of mouth. So what that experience really taught me was to let my own lived experience really inform my practice. Often the historical experiences of Black people in this country have been marginalized because they don't use the sort of legitimate forms of documentation that people sort of expect when we talk about historical knowledge. And so for me, it's really about tapping into and expanding that knowledge that has really been bestowed on me by my community and by my family, and really by my ancestors, to provide a unique perspective to this field and to these institutions. It's also really, what it does for me is it also brings the importance of sort of a cultural collective consciousness. How can we start to prioritize these vernacular narratives that are not locked into sort of institutional translations? And that brings me also to a quote by Audre Lorde that states, "The master's house will not be dismantled by the master's tools." So to negotiate these sort of incongruities is really having the critical consciousness to see that they exist, to identify what these master's tools are and bring them to light. And kind of going back to the premise of this question and the UT's oil lands, I didn't know that they existed. I didn't know where that money was going for. And I really had to do my research and inform myself in sort of what these practices are. And then finally, I'll just end with saying that oftentimes for me, just existing in these spaces at all is a daily practice of negotiating these incongruities, finding my voice in spaces that have historically excluded people who look like me, and just really kind of showing up and doing the work. And with that, I'll close. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for sharing, Taylor. We're going to move to our final theme. And I want to acknowledge the questions that we're getting. We'll try to get through them. The final theme is organizing social movements and education. And the student panelist for this question is Juan Tinishirish. Student organizing, social networks, and leadership have important legacies in the United States, yet our school and fields are meant to professionalize people, which can deter us from getting involved in large-scale social change efforts. How do we think about these concepts that are actually not part of our repertoire curriculum and syllabi? What skills and experience do you encourage us to develop as students? How did you learn to organize? What is your approach to building a coalition among people of color? And how can we translate some of the big ideas of social movements into our current day-to-day learning? And I do think that some of our panelists have touched upon these questions. And I'm gonna ask you, I wanna start with Juan to give him a little bit more time. And then I'm gonna ask our panelists to synthesize the response to these questions in 2 to 3 sentences if possible, so we can get to some of the questions that have been asked by the audience.
Thank you, Dr. Solis. It's an honor to be with you all here. And yeah, in response to the questions, like I believe I'm a doctoral student now here at UT, which at the beginning I wasn't sure that I wanted to study a doctoral program, right? Because I thought my work would be more critical and maybe it will have more impact in the community where I am from, and I'm from Guatemala. But then talking with my relatives, and they have been kind of fighting and social movements there, they kind of encouraged me to keep staying here and trying to be in these institutions too, in the university and having a degree, a doctoral degree here. Because usually in academia, the voices that we hear are voices that are not like us, like people of color, right? So thinking about that, it's it just made me think how important it's our body and knowledge here, and kind of makes me think about, for example, I got my degree in planning, and thinking about who is making these like designs, who is making this decision, these policies. And we usually just hear like the knowledge that we hear is people, white people, right? Western knowledge there. So something that I always wanted to have is kind of be part of the community, even though I am inside of this institution. So for me as a student, like it's very important to be in, at least in this students organization. I'm part of the Native American Indigenous organization and also the Latin American Students Association. And something that we always kind of try to do is kind of move or decentralize knowledge from the university. Well, before the pandemic, we kind of try to look for local, local places here in Austin or like grassroots in order to engage and like hear from them what is happening, what is like the latest part in the latest news here. But also like, because we are not, most of the Latin American students and also like the Native American students, we're from all over the world, right? And we, like UT is kind of a center that that encourage us to like share our experiences. So something that we have tried to do also, it's connecting with grassroots in Latin America, for example. We kind of did like this conversation with Miriam Miranda, Garifuna women from Honduras, and having this conversation with a Mapuche leader, and then like having conversations here at Texas with, I think Dr. Garza and Maestra Rocha are here too, like, and we are like, we try to like engage with them in order to keep this knowledge going on, right? And something like it's very interesting is like how now I think the opportunity of Zoom, I think I was talking about like how Zoom has also opened up a little bit this, disrupt this kind of notion of space, right? In universities, because before not all people could like attend to these conferences, they couldn't like assist, they couldn't travel, and even though they are in the same city, but you know, like racial like segregation, it's real, right? So not a lot of people have the access to get into the university. And I think Zoom had, or like this online conferences have opened up to this conversation and this mutual like knowledge, right? So at the end, like something that I've been kind of thinking about is their role as a scholar and activism, and how like, for example, we speak about social justice, affordability, sustainability, but then like we are here, like we are in the institutions. And I think thanks for Dr. God, because like I think, yeah, sometimes we need to like kind of betray our institutions too. But then like sometimes I think for some folks, we need to keep asking of what is affordable, or like affordable for whom, right? Because sometimes the work can be appropriated for other like groups too, and sustainable for whom too. Like we see like a lot of houses that, yeah, maybe they are getting access to housing, but like how affordable they are really. Yeah, and then like maybe, since it's an honor to be with you all, I would like to hear more about your experiences about social movements and organizing in the school too, because I think it's inspiring for us who are like in this process of getting a degree, to know how do you handle, how do you navigate this institution as well, because it's not easy, right? So yeah, thank you.
All right, 2 or 3 sentences. It's a lot of pressure. But let's start with Kian, then we'll have Dr. Bullard, and Dallas will close us off. And I do want to give Dallas props for answering questions in real time in the Q&A box. So that's happening. So let's wrap this up.
Thank you. So yes, quickly, I would not call myself an organizer. but I learned to learn from organizers by working with them. And I did this primarily when I had the opportunity to serve on the board of an organization called the Audre Lorde Project in New York. So this is a radical queer people of color led organization for social and economic justice for queer folks. And what they taught is how do we build cohesive theories of social change, something that I had not learned in architecture school for sure. That's what I got from them. And how to position one's work from the point of view of the most marginalized among our communities and our constituents. So for the Audre Lorde Project, for instance, always prioritizing and highlighting the struggles of Black folks primarily. So Black queer youth in Brooklyn, and folks who, and trans and gender non-conforming folks who are oftentimes, even within the broader queer POC community, targeted and marginalized most. And so how do you build up strategies with a view to holding up and empowering the most marginalized? And that's, yeah, I'll pause.
I grew up in the civil rights movement, and I went to undergraduate was Alabama A&M University, an all-Black university, and Atlanta University, an all-Black university founded by the Freedmen's Bureau, and the sociology department was founded by W.E.B. Du Bois. So the connection between civil rights and education and the mission of our Black universities was to educate and education for liberation. So to make that transition in terms of work, and I tell people, you know, out of Du Bois's sociology, the concept was they didn't teach us dead white man sociology. They taught us what's called kick-ass sociology. You take your sociology and you do something with it. You take your training and you do something with it. And that with it was part of social movement. And seeing, you know, a lot of our Black leaders had gone to Black colleges and had got PhDs and law degrees, et cetera. And that mobilization and that intergenerational mobilization transferred from being professionals out there, as well as taking the next generation and bringing them on, that kind of thing. So social movements for me was second nature. It was not something that you planned to do; you just did it.
Thank you both for the responses. I liked Dr. Go earlier, the work that you explained of how, you know, a top-down approach is not it's not a good approach. You have to ensure that you're engaging the folks who are directly impacted by whatever is being planned, right? And I really I firmly believe that, you know, a grassroots approach is always powerful. Social movements are built by grassroots energy, and organizing is about building that power amongst grassroots people and getting them to talk about their issues, their struggles, but also connecting those struggles for a common goal. And I think that I would encourage everybody, whether you're going into the professional world, whatever you may be doing, to really take a time to read up on the history of the civil rights movement. And not only that, but read up on the labor justice movement and the work of union organizers across this country who did amazing work on how to build collective power. Read up on all these different fights against injustice and have a sincere conversation of how that informs your profession. And I think the point I made on the last time I talked is you have to accept the fact
that if we are truly about building a better world for all of us, we're going to have to be uncomfortable. We have to be uncomfortable. We have to face the fact that, hey, if we really are about racial equity in this country, if we're really about building sustainable city plans and designs, you may not be making as much money as you could be if you go the other way. You may not be able to obtain, or may not have access or provide access to certain things. I think that's something that, like, really, this is a systemic issue that involves taking a systemic approach to it. So I think we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable when we think about how we are actually building a just and sustainable society. I think I could go on more, but I want to be respectful of time. I think the only thing is, how did I learn how to organize? Listening. That's the biggest thing. Just shut up and listen. And if you feel like, oh, I read about this and I wrote a research paper on this, so I have the right to speak up. No, just shut up and listen to the community and what they're fighting for and what they're about. I think that is the greatest asset that you could have in any type of building power, and getting folks to talk. That's how you build coalition between communities of color, is just work to get folks in space, set up the system where they can engage, but allow folks to engage, and don't put yourself into that. So, check.
Those are powerful closing words in response to the issues that students have raised. Thank you so much for all of the wisdom that everyone here has shared today. I think we have time for a couple of more questions, and I'll start with one in the chat. This is a question about, Olivia writes to us from New Haven. Her question is about working on projects that are being pitted against each other. And Olivia, feel free to chime in. But affordable housing is being pitted against green development. So when, and I think that we see kind of communities being pitted against each other in different ways all the time. So any general responses to that question?
Yeah, let me jump off on this. A lot of times it's a false argument. Affordable housing need to be green, and if you look at almost every major city has a issue of affordable housing, and if we allow market forces to drive the decisions, we'll end up having green, sustainable, walkable, resilient communities that will be very homogeneous and very white. So we need to make sure that when we design, plan, and build, that the equity frame is placed at the center. Climate gentrification is real. It's more than just a term. It's real, and we need to address that upfront and center, and not make it appear somehow that that people are trying to not address issues of sustainability, and people are against green this and green that. You know, deal with the justice and deal with it up front. Deal with the racism, deal with it up front, and we could go a long ways.
Anyone else on that one? We can come back to it also. There was a question, what I think is a very important question and often comes up in my discussions with students, is the emphasis on racial justice in the United States. This particular person works and I believe lives in a Middle Eastern context and applies a poverty lens to their work. How do you think about if and how racial justice translates to other contexts, and the international or globalized dimension of environmental justice?
Let me take, in 1991, we had the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. We developed 17 principles of environmental justice in October 1991. In June of 92, we took those 17 principles and to Rio de Janeiro at the Earth Summit. By time in 1 year, those principles had been translated into a half dozen languages. So the principles that you look at it, they translate well because the same system and the same transnationals that's kicking people's butt here and poisoning people here, it's the same companies that's operating around the world. So we talk about the same system of oppression. You can call it racism, imperialism, colonialism, and all the other isms that's creating the disparities. And if you look at that people of color around the world, 2/3 of the world's population, but if you look at the impacts of what's happening in terms of the standard of living, et cetera, you can see that the extraction of wealth from the vast majority of the world has created and left poverty, pollution, death, and disease. So yes, it translates very well.
I think that is said.
Go ahead.
I think that is said excellently. And so that's the only thing I would say is those processes are transnational. And I think depending on who we are working with and where, we might see it, as Dr. Bullard has been saying, what is the justice lens from that place? It may be connected to the same transnational forces and the corporations and the globalized climate change, but the framework of justice might be somewhat different. And we're able to, and I think we should be able to refocus and retune how we talk about the issues confronting folks on the ground through the identities and the frameworks that are present on the ground. So I think about, like, you know, I don't call folks people of color, for instance, when I'm working in Jakarta. They have other ways to talk about that. It may be more like a pro-poor movement in the local language. But the broader analysis, I think, is clear.
Yeah. Let me just clarify. When we took the principles of environmental justice and we talked about people of color in the U.S., when we took it to Brazil and it got translated into Spanish and Portuguese, we had to clarify people of color, as it got translated into Spanish, meant black. They thought we were talking about black people, just black people. And so we had to make sure that people of color is more than just about color. It's about a political framework of people of color. I mean, so that's why I say when it got translated and people had to look at the whatever Aborigines in Australia or colors in South Africa. I mean, they don't consider themselves black; they consider themselves colored. But that nuance, whatever, they are oppressed because of color. You're colored, or you are African. You're black. So that's how we was translating that. So it wasn't just talking about just people of color. Yeah.
I love seeing him get worked up. That was power right there. I would only add into it. I'm looking over here. I'm supposed to be looking over here. You know, there is a unifying class struggle within all of this, and I think that does permeate across the globe. And it just so happens that in many places in the world, that it is people of color who are in the bottom ends, who have to deal and carry the weight of our addiction to consumerism, our addiction to fossil fuels, our addiction to all these different things that is literally killing communities, certain communities, for the benefit of a few. And so I think there is definitely a connection across the board to what we are talking about. But yeah, I'll just check there.
Well, and it actually, Dallas, what you just talked about relates to a question we also had in the chat, which is going back to your earlier comments about capitalism. Is environmental justice fundamentally compatible with capitalism? And I will wrap it up with that question with a couple of panelists, whoever wants to chime in and share these any final words of wisdom although that's kind of a loaded question to raise.
Yeah,
as we're wrapping up.
I answered. I did my best to answer it because I think it's an age-old question, and it will not. There's a core debate. I personally feel that the tenets and goals of capitalism are antithetical to the tenets and goals of environmental justice. I feel like there's a massive amount of nuance in that statement, but fundamentally, that is how I feel, and that is expressed not just from me, but from just lived and worked experience with so many different communities who are struggling, who are fighting for the right to self-determine what their future is. And the major roadblock in that struggle is capitalism. And so I just share that much.
Yeah, I will say I like how Mr. Goldtooth, you put it. I think as well, I think the processes of capitalism primarily underscored by this notion of accumulation for accumulation's sake is fundamentally contradictory with environmental and with socio-environmental sustainability. And so, but again, there are many ways that we can address this and different levels where we can design or organize or work for. And so in some ways it is actually I'm gonna, I don't know how to say this in like a sentence, so so I won't, except that I think it is. But you know, we all address the issues that concern us from different points of view and different levels.
Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna. Any student?
Actually, can I do one more thing? I'm sorry. So the corollary to that is that we might think about a more socialized control over the kinds of processes that we're talking about. So what is the alternative to this accumulation for accumulation's sake? It's to look at what is happening in the ground, on top of the ground, across countries, and say, we need more collective, more social control over these processes that at the moment, few of us have. We are bound to this process that controls our lives. What we fight for, I think, is more control, more democratic and collective control over those processes. And I think that's a good start.
I think there's another system that is equally and as powerful and potent as capitalism. It's called systemic racism. If we could go to another system, and if we don't address the systemic racism, we will still have the kinds of inequality that would manifest itself. And so I think when we talk about, you know, the environmental justice, the economic justice, the justice when it comes to health, the justice when it comes to the whole quality of life stuff. I mean, if you're just talking about let's do away with capitalism, if you got this powerful other overlay, we will still have the kinds of inequality that's generated from this powerful system that has remained intact, unchanged, with only a little tweaking.
Okay, I think like some of the panelists, I'm feeling very fired up, and it feels very unfortunate for us to be having to bring this panel discussion to a close. But I do want to express that we're getting real-time feedback in the chat, in the question box, and via text on how excited people feel by this discussion. And so I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to the students, to our panelists who brought their very rich and wonderful experiences, challenges to the table to share with everyone. I want to thank the UT School of Architecture, Leora, for supporting, conceptualizing, and making an event like this happen. So based on how this discussion went, I know that I'm going to be seeing everyone here again. And one of the things I love about events like these is that they create the basis for new relationships, new connections, and new ideas that we can employ to build broader collective efforts. So we're going to wrap it up. Thank you everybody so much. And we'll be in touch.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Very good.
Thank you all so much. It's been
Thank
such a
you.